Hey guys, today I'm going to give you a short but very practical introduction to using Unix systems. This is roughly going to be broken up into three parts. One, I'm going to show you how to access remote servers via SSH. Then we're going to explore different commands for navigating and manipulating Unix file systems. And finally, I'm going to show you how to create and execute a very simple bash script. So the first thing I'm going to show you today is how to access a remote server. So this is a computer that's available to you over a network, whether it be a local area network or the internet, through a command line tool called SSH. So to do this, we're going to have to open up a command line environment. So if you're on Windows, the way you're going to want to open up a command line environment is to go to the search bar here that's inside all of your standard taskbars and search up the PowerShell. And the PowerShell, this is one of a number of programs that will give you a command line environment in Windows. I'm just going to maximize this and make it a bit bigger. And it's not the nicest looking one. You could go on to the internet and find other ones. I actually have one called Windows Terminal that you can just Google and install yourself if you want kind of a nicer looking one, but it'll do the trick. It'll do everything we need to do inside this video if you just use the standard built-in PowerShell. To open up a command line environment in macOS, you're going to have to search for the terminal in Spotlight. You can open that up by pressing Command and space and just searching terminal. This program is going to look a bit different than the PowerShell that I'm going to be using in Windows, but it's going to function roughly the same way, at least for the needs of this video. So before we get into actually using the command line, I should maybe clarify what exactly is this Unix thing beyond, just some weird command-based interface. So Unix is actually a family of operating systems. Any operating system that conforms to the single Unix specification, which there aren't really many that actually conform completely to it, which is why we usually say like Unix-like, or we use this Unix with a star definition, because there are all of these Unix systems, Unix-like systems, that don't fully conform to the specification, but they're all basically similar enough and conform to most of the specification, like Mac OS and Linux. Unix has evolved a lot over the years, and there are a lot of different Unix systems out there, or Unix-like systems, but the main ones you'll be using will be Mac OS and Linux-based systems, which is another thing. There are a bunch of different operating systems that all use the Linux kernel, so they all use this core part. But for the most part, these will all be similar enough that everything I'm teaching you in this video, you can use on any one of these systems. So now we have access to the command line interface for our personal computer. So you can start typing a command. So for one thing, the ls command, it lists what's in the current directory, and the cd command, let's say we could cd into documents, will change the directory into another folder, say the documents folder, and we press ls to list what's inside this folder. And so this is just another interface to do what you probably already know how to do in graphical interfaces like Finder or Windows Explorer. So when I open up Windows Explorer, I can go into, like, I start at my PC and go into my documents folder and look around and copy and move files around like this. So this is the same thing, just another interface that we can use. Now, if you're on Windows, you should note that although a lot of the commands I'm going to be teaching you are going to be similar in nature to the Windows commands, Windows is not a Unix-like environment. Some things I'm going to be teaching you aren't going to work in the Windows command environment. However, there isn't much use for the Windows command environment anymore. Not too many people use it anymore. Generally, command line environments are reserved for using servers, and these are generally going to be Unix servers. So what we're going to do, instead of continuing to mess around in the Windows command line, what we're going to do is we're going to interface into a server command line environment using something called SSH. So SSH is going to allow us to access the command line interface of a server through the command line interface for our personal computer. So we're going to need some server to SSH into. So you could access it by its domain name. You could also access it by its IP address if you know that. And you're going to have an account already set up for you on this server and a username for that account. And you'll SSH into it by typing in SSH, your username, so this at character, and then either the domain name or IP address. So if you're a McMaster student, for example, you say SSH, your Mac ID, and McMaster provides a variety of servers for you. One of them is mills.mcmaster.ca, and hit enter. And if this is the first time you're accessing this server, it might prompt you with a yes or no question to begin with. Just type in yes and hit enter. And then it should prompt you for your password. And enter in your password. And one thing that tends to trip up a lot of people is while you're entering in your password, it won't show anything. But it is entering it in. Just type it in and hit enter. And then if all goes well, it should log you into a server like this. And it should give you a prompt, usually with your username at whatever the name of your server is. So now you have access to the command line interface for the server. And one of the first things you might want to do is use the uname command to get some information about your server's operating system. So if I go and type in uname space -a, it'll give me some information. So this is saying it's a Linux server. It's giving me the host name, which I already kind of needed to access. It's giving me some information about the server's architecture. This is a times 8664 architecture. So if you don't understand everything that spits out, that's okay. It's just giving you a certain amount of information that you might find relevant. So now we know that, so even if you're on your personal computer is a Windows computer, now we are using a interface for a Linux system. So this is no longer your personal computer's interface. Now we are using a computer somewhere on the internet. And if we want to get out, we type exit. And now we're back at our personal computer's command line interface. So at this point, if you haven't been following along already, I invite you to try SSHing into a server using the uname command to investigate its OS information and then exiting. If you're watching this and you're not a McMaster student, you're going to need access to a different server than the mills.mcmaster.ca one. If you look up some online, you might be able to find a free one. Now that we know how to access a remote Unix system, let's talk about how to navigate and manipulate the Unix file system. So the first thing we're gonna want to learn about to do this is about file paths. So file paths specify the location of files and directories, and they do so by separating things by a backslash. So usually the beginning of your file system will start with a backslash, and then this will be, say, a directory, another directory, and then finally the file that you're trying to specify. So there are certain special file paths that we're going to want to make note of. Most notably, so the root directory, so this is the very, very beginning of your file system, is just going to be a backslash. Now there's also this tilde, which is located at the top left of your keyboard usually. Usually it's right underneath the escape button. This is going to be your home directory. We'll talk about your home directory in a second, but this is going to be the directory that you're initially put into when you SSH into a Linux machine. You'll be initially put into this home directory. It's kind of your directory, your user's directory. Then there's also the dot to specify the current directory and the ... to specify the previous directory. So let's try this out. Let's try SSHing back into our server. And actually, before I do that, let's take a note. if you're on a Windows machine, if you look at the current directory you're in, which you can do with this command, you'll notice that the slash is actually a forward slash to represent directories. So this is one thing that's different about Windows computers versus Unix systems. When we get into our Unix system, we're going to notice that now the slash is the other way. So this is how one of the ways you can tell that, like, oh, I am in a Unix system because of the slash direction. This is a backslash on Unix and forward slash on Windows. So one of the very first commands that you should learn about is the cd command, and I'll also teach you this pwd command while we're at it. So if you haven't already noticed, pwd, it stands for parent working directory. It shows you the current directory you're in. Okay, so the current file path you are in. So right now we're in /u40. So this is a folder called u40 /dlcb. So this is a folder that happens to be the same thing as my username. Now let's say I do cd /. So this will bring me to the root directory. Okay, so this cd stands for change directory. And if I type pwd, see, now you can see that I'm just in the root directory. Now let's try typing in cd and that tilde thing. Okay, so this will bring me to my home. So this is my, every user on a system will have a home. If I enter that in, type pwd, you'll see that, oh, my home was actually the original directory I was in when I logged in. Okay, this u40 /dlcb. So my home happens to be the same name. It's a folder that's the same name as my username. Now another interesting one is cd .. I type pwd. So this brings me one directory up. Okay, so I was in u40 dlcb, and now I'm brought one directory up to u40. And in fact, if I type cd dlcb now I'm back in my home directory. Okay. I could also type cd .. just a single dot, and this doesn't move me around at all. So the single dot stands for your current directory, and used in this context with cd, it seems pretty useless, but you'll see later that it's actually quite useful sometimes to specify this is the current directory I'm in right now. The next command we should learn about for file navigation purposes is the ls command. So if you type ls, it'll show you what's inside your current directory. Now, I have a folder in my home directory called public HTML. It's actually where I'm hosting HTML files to be served as a web server. You probably might have nothing in your home directory right now if this is the first time you're entering it. One thing you can do is try doing cd .. to go back one directory, and then type ls. Okay? So I'm on a file now with a lot of different users. So it's actually showing me all of the home directories of all of the different users. However, if I look carefully, I can find myself here. So this is my home directory. So when I type in cd dalvsb, okay, I can cd back into my home directory. And in fact, I can, let's say I go back one more, cd .. Okay, there's some other directories in here. So remember, u40 was actually the directory where my home directory was in. So I can type in cd u40 /dalvescb. Now, one thing to note here, now I'm back in my home directory. One thing to note here is the difference between relative and absolute file paths. Okay, so let's say I try and type in cd u40 dlcb. So this is making note of I'm already in this directory, right? It says no such file or directory, right? But then let's say I type in cd and I begin it with a backslash. Now it didn't have a problem, right? And it put me into this directory. So what's going on here? So when I specify the backslash to begin with, I'm saying like change into this directory starting at the root file system and then what's from there in the file system. So I'm specifying when I start with the backslash, I'm specifying the whole path from the very beginning of the file system, right? However, when I do something like when I say cd dot dot and I say cd dalvsb, or if I dot dot again and I say cd u40 dalvsb, I'm specifying a relative file path. So I'm doing this, I'm able to do this without the beginning backslash because I'm in a directory with u40 in it. I can say cd u40 and then I can continue the path beyond there. Now that we know how to navigate our file system, let's talk about how to actually manipulate it. So there are a few basic manipulation operations you might want to perform on files and directories. You might want to create, delete, copy, or move. Let's start with creation. So there's two main commands you're going to want to use to create either a file or a directory. So the touch command you can use to create an empty file. You can also just use text editors to create empty files. I'll show you that a bit later. Then the make directory command you can use to create a directory. So if we go back and let's cd into our, make sure we're in our home. So we'll do cd tilde. So let's do an ls to look what's inside our home right now. So I have this public underscore HTML. You might have nothing there. And let's do touch, and we can make a file. We can call it whatever we want. Okay, some file, and we can give an extension if we want. We don't really need to. We can say .txt, and we do an ls again. Now we'll see that. Oh look, now we have some file. What about directory? So you can actually tell by the color difference that some file is a file and public underscore HTML is a directory. And we'll verify this if we do mkdir, stands for make new directory. Some dir. Do an ls again. Okay, yeah, see, some dir is also colored a bit differently. Now what if we want to delete this file or directory that we just created? Well, there's one command for deleting stuff. However, you're going to have to use it slightly differently if it's a file or if it's a directory. So it's rm, it stands for remove basically. And what you do is type rm space some file. All these commands have spaces in between them if you weren't noticing. ls. And you'll see that's deleted. Now, but if I try rm some dir, see, it's going to complain. It's going to say cannot remove some dir. It's a directory. So what we need to do is we need to do rm space -r space some dir. And what this is going to do, this -r, it stands for recursive, right? So what it's basically saying is delete the directory and everything inside it. Okay, and that's basically why it didn't let us delete the directory in the first place, because it wasn't sure if, well, what if you don't want to delete the stuff that's inside it? In fact, it complains even if the directory has nothing inside of it, just like some dir doesn't. Now if we do this, you'll see now that it works. Now it works. The directory is deleted. Fair warning, there is no coming back from using the rm command. Okay, so a lot of you are used to on your desktop, if you accidentally delete stuff, there's a trash of some sort that you can go and bring stuff back out of. With the command line, you have no such convenience. When you delete something, it is gone. Okay, what about copying files? So once again, there's one command for copying, and we're going to have to do a similar thing with the remove command. For when you want to copy a file, it's straightforward, but when you want to copy a directory, you're going to have to give it this -r again. So let's say, let's make some new directories again. Some dir touch some file. Okay, so we made a new directory, some dir, and we made a new file, some file. So let's say we want to make a copy of some file. We can say cp some file 1. Okay, so now there will be an exact copy of that file called some file 1. Let's say we want to copy the directory cp r some dir 2. So this recursive flag, once again, is important. In fact, I'll show you just as an example what happens if we forget it. Okay, see, it doesn't like it because it's a directory. But if we do r, see, now we have 2 directories. Now something else you might want to do is, let's say we want to copy some file into another directory. Okay, so we could say some file, or cp some file into some dir. And if I do this, you see, if I do ls some dir, so when I do ls on some dir, it's going to show me what's inside of some dir. And it's going to say, oh look, some files inside there. And I could cd into some dir. It's the same thing. And type ls. Yes, some files inside there. Let's say I make a new directory in some dir called some dir deeper. I cd ... So now you'll see in some dir, there's some dir deeper inside there, right? So if I want to copy some file 1 into some dir deeper, I can type cp some file 1 some dir / some dir deeper. Okay, and let's say I want to call some file 1 something else than some file 1. So if I just type this in, it'll copy it in as some file 1. Like, let's say I want to call it something else now. I could just write the name of whatever I want to call it, and because it doesn't already exist, it'll make that copy inside there of it. So now if I do ls some dir deeper, you'll see there's some file 2 there. Finally, let's say we want to move a file directory. Now, interestingly enough, move, you can use the same way for a file or directory. You just don't have to specify the recursive flag just because. So you specify move, the file you want to move, and where you want to move it to. Okay, so this can be a path to wherever you want to move it to, or what you want to call it as well. Now, the interesting trick here is that you could also use it to rename a file. I'll show you in a second. So let's look in our current directory. So now we have some dir 2, some file 1. Okay, and let's look in some dir 2. There's nothing in it right now. So let's try moving some file 1 into some dir 2. Okay. Now if I ls some dir 2, look, some file 1 is inside it. And if I do an ls on my current directory that I'm in, look, some file 1 is gone. So it actually moved the file into there. And if I wanted to move some dir into some dir 2, I could also just do the same thing. Some dir 2. Okay, and I don't even need to specify the recursive flag. Now if I ls, look, some dir is gone. And if I look some dir 2, some dir is inside there. And in fact, I could look deeper and I could see that it moved some dir and all of the stuff inside of sumdir as well. Okay, it moved everything over. Now, the interesting thing I could do with move, if I look at my current directory, so now I have, there's a sum file here. Let's say I want to rename some file, okay? I can just type in move some file, and I could enter in whatever I want, like some file 1 now, okay? And it will rename, because there is no some file 1 inside my current directory, it'll just take that to mean, oh, you want it to rename it to this file. Okay, and it gets renamed. I could do the same thing with sumdir here. I can move sumdir 2 to sumdir 3. Before we move on to part 3, as a little challenge, I want you to try and follow the following steps. In your home directory, create a directory called mydir. Create another directory called mydir2. Move mydir2 into mydir. Create a file called myfile, and then create a copy of my file in mydir2. When you're finished, you should have a my directory and a my file inside of your home directory here. And when you do an ls on my directory, there should be a my directory too. And when you do an ls on my directory slash my directory 2, there should be a my file. So for the final part of this lesson, I'm going to show you how to create and execute a simple bash script. So one of the great things about learning how to use the command line is that if you find yourself doing the same type of operations over and over again, like let's say you're doing this file system maintenance regularly where you're moving files into certain directories based on their file name, what you can actually do is you could put the sequence of commands you would be using into a file, okay, that we call a script, and then execute that script, and it executes all of those commands for you automatically. So before we can create bash scripts, we're going to have to first learn how to use command line based text editors. So there's a decent selection of command line based editors that you can use. So some very popular ones are Emacs, and then there's V and Vim. Vim is kind of an improved version of V that's usually available. These two have been around for a very long time. They've been very popular, and there's actually been quite a war fought between the two in terms of popularity. However, they're not that beginner friendly. In fact, even figuring out how to exit them after just opening them up can be a bit tricky for newcomers, because there's so many. They use a lot of elaborate key bindings to do operations. So the one I'm going to be teaching you for the purpose of this little lesson is going to be Nano, because it's a bit more user friendly. I'll also mention that most desktop editors, so there are a lot of code editors that some of you might have used, like VS Code and stuff. They have some method of supporting remote editing, so you can open VS Code or whatever on your desktop computer, on your personal computer, and then you can tell it to open a file that's actually on a server some way and edit it that way. So using terminal based editors for like a lot of heavy coding often isn't that necessary. However, it is very useful for doing stuff quickly, you'll find. So if you have to make some quick changes to some code on the server, you're going to want to know how to use a command line based editor. So if we go back into our command line, and I'm already SSH'd into my server here, let's try creating a file and opening it in a text editor. Now, one thing I could do is I could use the touch command to create the file. So if I look at my directory right now, I have nothing going on except for this public HTML folder, which we'll just ignore. I could use touch to create a file, but what I could also do is I could use Nano to just open up a blank directory. So I just type in Nano and enter. So this opens up kind of a text-based environment where I can start entering stuff. So I can just say, hello, my friends. Okay. And you'll notice at the bottom, there's some instructions here. And everything begins with this hat here. So this hat actually means control. It's a bit off-putting because a lot of people think it actually means the key that's usually underneath 6, like shift 6. But it actually means control. So when I write something here, let's say I want to save it. Unfortunately, it doesn't say save here. It says write out. Write out is the same thing as save. So it has the hat and an O. So what we want to actually enter is control O. And then it'll ask me what file name to write it to. And I can give the file name right now. So I could just say it's hello.txt and hit enter. And see, it wrote it out. And then if I want to exit Nano, this one's a bit more straightforward. It tells me exit. So I'm going to press Control X and I exit out. If I type in ls, you see that I have a hello.txt. And I can use a command called cat to look at what's inside the file. So if I type in cat hello.txt, I can see that the insides of the file are some text that says hello my friends. So this is the basics of how to use Nano. Another thing I could have done is, let's say I want to open up this file again. What I'll do is I type in nano space, and this time I'll give it the name of the file I want to open up. And if the file didn't already exist, it would automatically create it for me. So I can type in nano space hello.txt and it opens up my file again, and I can write more to it now. I could write goodbye forever. So I'm saying hello, and now I'm saying goodbye. And let's say I, without saving, I just press Control X to exit. It'll ask me if I want to save it first. And I can type in, see, it gives me Y for yes, or N for no, or Control C for cancel. I'll type in Y, yes. And it asks me again what the file name I want to write to. And it gives me the name of the file that already is there. I'll just type in enter. And now it edited that file again. I can check if it made those changes. I'll type cat hello.txt. And yeah, you'll see the contents of hello.txt were changed. So that's the basics of how you use Nano. So now that we know how to edit files on the command line, let's try and create our first bash script. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a file called test.sh. So this .sh extension basically is the standard extension you'll use for bash scripts. And we're going to put a bit of code in here. This part, I'll explain in a moment. We're basically just going to put echo hello world, which is a command that just kind of spits back out to standard output, whatever you put after it. And then we're going to make the file an executable with the chmod command and then execute it. So let's go to our command line. We're already SSH'd into the server, and let's run through those steps. So the first thing was to create a file called test.sh and open it in our text editor. So we can do that in one command by typing in nano space test.sh. Okay, and now the first line of every bash script is going to be this hashtag !bin/bash. I'll explain that in a moment. Just know that you have to put it there for starters. Now, any line, anything that comes after this could be commands. So all the standard commands that we use any of those commands now. Any proper bash command that we write in here will be executed. So let's try out some of our commands. So we can make a new directory called hello. We could create a file called hello.txt. And then we can echo. So echo will just print something out to the screen, whatever we put here. Hello's created. Okay, and press Control X. And I'm going to save this. Yep, it's going to be called test.sh. Hit enter. And if I do an ls, you can see, oh, there we go. We have our test.sh. So now we want to be able to execute this script. So to do that, first thing we're going to do is we're going to make this an executable. So we're going to write chmod space plus x space test.sh. And if we do an ls again, we'll see that it even changes the color to let us know that, oh, this is an executable program now. And then if we want to actually execute it, we'll type in / the name of the file, test.sh. Okay, then you'll see it printed out what we told it to echo, our hellos.created. And if we do an ls, you can see, oh look, it made the directory hello, and it made the file hello.txt. Looks like we made a pretty successful bash script. So before we end this lesson, I'll talk a little bit about that weird thing at the top of the bash script, the hashtag exclamation mark. This is known as a shebang, and it's used to specify which interpreter to run a script with. Okay, so the command line that we're in, when we're at a command line, we are using a bash interpreter usually. There are a few other shells, they're called, that a Unix command line might use, but it's usually a bash interpreter, at least right now. And so all of these commands that we enter, like cd and make new directory and stuff, they're being run through this bash program. And actually, the other way you could have run the program rather than specifying the / is you could have just typed in bash and the name of the program. So I could go back here. I could type in bash test.sh. Okay. And, oh, it gave me a little error because it tried to create a directory when the directory already existed. But besides that, it executed the file fine. And in fact, if I do this way, then I don't have to do the chmod step, and I don't have to put that shebang at the top. The shebang is just an easier way so that you can execute anything with this /. Now, an interesting thing you could do is you could also run other things that use an interpreter this way, like Python. So if some of you are familiar with the Python programming language, I could have also made a little script that put this at the top, and you actually have to specify the path to the Python interpreter on your operating system for this to work properly. So with bash, it's basically always going to be in /bin/bash. Python might be located somewhere different than this location on your system, so you'll have to figure out where the path is to it. But if you do, you can write a little script like this, and the same way we executed our bash script, you can write some Python code inside here and execute it that same way. One final challenge for you. I want you to create and execute a bash script that makes a new directory called test with a single file, test1.txt, inside of that directory. So inside of that test directory. So you should be able to execute this bash script, and it should automatically generate this directory with the file test1.txt inside of it. And with that, we are finished our little lesson for today. Today we learned how to access a remote server through the command line or the terminal. We learned how to navigate and manipulate Unix file systems. And we learned how to create, edit, and execute a simple bash script. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I enjoyed teaching it to you. Have a good one.